Hello and welcome to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. If you're watching the video, we are very glad to have you. If you're listening to the audio, we love when you come back and listen to us. And we are in today part two of a series that we're doing on the EFO, the Executive Fire Officer. And many of you probably have seen those initials on paper or on a board or something like that in your firehouse, but you're not sure what it is. And maybe you didn't want to ask who it was that had that EFO. But we're trying to break the mystique of it and show the value, which I really learned more about in the first episode with Helen and our other guests. I didn't realize the breadth and depth of the EFO program and how important it is. And if you have any desire whatsoever to climb the rungs of not those aluminum or wooden ladders, but the ladder of career, then you want to look into the EFO program if you plan to be a leader in the fire service. Our first guest is Helen B Johnson. She was the executive director of the State Firefighters and Fire Marshals Association, firefighter pension commissioner, state of Texas, was appointed by Governor Bill Clements, Governor Ann Richards, and Governor at that time, George W. Bush. And she was a civilian with the Austin Fire Department from 1970 to 1987, and she was the executive assistant to the fire chief. She went to St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, with a bachelor's degree in public administration. She graduated magna cum laude. She became an executive fire officer program graduate from the National Fire Academy in 1989, and the Texas Governor's Executive Development Class 11 in 1993. She has been on the National Fire Academy Board of Visitors from 2002 to 2013 and served as the chair of the board from 2008 to 2013. She's a National Fire Academy Alumni Association, has been there from 1998 to present. She's been at the Bush School of Public Service Executive Management Program board member from 98 to 2005. Texas Forest Service Rural Fire Advisory Council from 97 to 2005. The Advisory Board of Texas Fire Museum, 93 to 2005. Fire Prevention Committee of the IAFC, 93 to 96. Board of Directors of the National Society of Executive Fire Officers, 89 to 98. A guest instructor at Texas A&M Fire Training School, 1987, 2005. And if you are someone who really loves fire service training, that Texas A&M Fire Training is amazing. Texas Commission on Fire Protection, Personnel Standards and Education, 1985 to 1987, appointed by Governor Mark White. And civic activities, Austin Meals on Wheels from 82 to 88, and she was president of the board for 85 to 86. She presented the 9/11 tribute art exhibition at the Texas State Capitol on 9/11/2002. She raised and presented funds to 11 New York City fallen firefighter families from Ladder 5, Engine 24 in Greenwich Village in October of 2001. Also joining us today is Chief Nelson Pyle. He served in the U.S. Navy for 9 years. Thank you, Chief, for your service to our country. Anne Arundel County, Maryland Fire Rescue and EMS for 27 years, reaching Deputy Chief. And the City of Washington, North Carolina, Fire Rescue and EMS, 6 years as Chief of Department. He was at the National Fire Academy, over 10 years experience developing and or instructing classes in incident command, hazardous materials, disaster preparedness, leadership, and train the trainer. Served as an evaluator for applications submitted under the Federal SAFE Grant Program. He has an AA degree from Catonsville Community College in Fire Service Technology, a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Baltimore in Fire Service Management. He became an executive fire officer in 1988 and has over 1,100 hours of NFA courses. Certified as a Chief Fire Officer, Fire Officer 4, Fire Service Instructor 3, Level 3 Hazardous Materials Responder, and High-Rise Aerial Rescue. He belongs to the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, the National Fire Academy Region 3 Training Resource and Data Exchange, the Trade Council, National Society of Executive Fire Officers, of which he's a past president, and National Advisory Committee to the Congressional Fire Service Caucus. Also joining us today is Chief Harold Bud Phillips. He has an associate degree from Monroe Community College in Fire Protection Technology and executive fire officer standing with the National Fire Academy. He was a firefighter from 1969 to 75, lieutenant from 75 to 80, captain from 1980 to 1990, battalion chief 90 to 92, assistant chief 92 to 97, deputy chief 97 to 2000, and chief of department from 2000 to 2018. Chief Phillips attended many classes at the National Fire Academy, beginning with hazardous material courses, which led to formation of a county hazardous materials response team. This led to instructor certification programs, which led to the NFA fire management courses, which culminated in acceptance into the Executive Fire Officer program. After becoming chief, Chief Phillips led his department to become the first internationally accredited fire department in New York State. Chief Phillips also became an internationally accredited chief fire officer. He was the New York Association of Fire Chiefs Fire Chief of the Year in 2006. Chief Phillips was the director of the New York Association of Fire Chiefs and the director of the New York Eastern Division of the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Chief Phillips joined the National Society of Executive Fire Officers after graduating in 1989. He became the Northeast Director before becoming the Vice President of the NSEFO. Chief Phillips was instrumental in the NSEFO merging with the IAFC as the Executive Fire Officer Section, and Chief Phillips retired in 2018 after serving his community for more than 48 years. To Chief Phillips, Chief Pyle, and to Helen, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in the first part, and Helen was part of that dais as well, we talked about the concept of the EFO, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And we just began, we really focused on the yesterdays and how it started and its formation. And let's start today, Helen, with what you see today, where the EFO is today. And then we'll take that and then in a second half, we'll look at what you folks are looking at for what you think we'll see and what you may already know might be happening tomorrow. So Helen, we'll start with you, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. It was really my honor to be one of the first females that graduated, and then to see this program continue through all these years. And now it's for many departments, it's a recommendation or a requirement for someone who is applying for a chief's job or an upper management job in the fire service to have gone through EFO. And I think that speaks well for it. I like to think the three of us sitting here were that baseline of it. And guys, do you remember when we were in our third year and it had never been a requirement that we had to do a research paper at the end? And they initiated that, and they said since we were in our third year, we had to do it. We got out there and we protested and we lost, and we had to write the research paper. So that kind of brings us up to date. I'm proud to be a part of that first class, first woman in all my classes, and to see where it is today, where it has broadened to where a lot of women, a lot of minorities have graduated from this. And I think the three of us stand on good foundation that we can take pride in getting that program started.
That's great to hear. And I think you said something, you gave away something very telling in those opening remarks. And I'm glad you did, because I don't know if our listeners and viewers actually realize you used the term "in our third year."
Yes.
And so I want our listeners and viewers to understand that the EFO is not, you go to a course a couple of weekends as a regional conference and you come out with your certification. It doesn't work that way.
That's right. And now it's 4 years.
And I think that I would compare the EFO to getting a PhD in the fire service. I think you put in the same amount of time, effort, research, travel, everything that any other candidate who's looking for a PhD does. From what I picked up in our first interviews and what you're saying now, I think it's important for our viewers and listeners to understand that this is a commitment program. That you have, if you're going to do this, you're jumping in with both feet, both hands, and as much of your brain as you can. And there'll be things that you didn't know, things that will surprise you, and things you maybe learned already. But the fact is, the purpose of this program is, as I understand it now, to make you the best fire officer, especially if you're going to be in a chief's position, the best fire officer possible.
Sure. I can remember in the very early days, if I recall, and Helen, my memory gets a little foggy at times, as you can imagine. But in the very early days, if I'm not mistaken, when you signed up for a class, that was all that was required. And it wasn't very long, I think, while we were still in the program, that the program required the chief of department to commit the student to the entire EFO program. That's how important it became to them. And to best of my knowledge, I don't recall ever hearing anybody in the classes say they couldn't get that commitment from their chiefs.
Right.
So that was kind of that transition from just a couple of classes in a program to a full-fledged program, which I also believe later on became, thanks to the work of Bert and Chuck and Don, that program became, if I'm not mistaken, about half of the credits necessary for a master's degree.
Right.
Was carried on further on. So the evolution has been from a couple of classes to basically half of a 4 to 6 year master's program. That's how much it's changed, how much the commitment has changed to it.
Right. But I think today, and we also want to mention for those who didn't hear the first episode, is that the EFO program is done at the National Fire Academy, which is in Emmitsburg, at our sacred site, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation.
Yep.
And if I only know of 2 sacred sites in my, as a former firefighter to me, and one is Emmitsburg and the other is downtown Manhattan, Lower East Side. And to me, they will always be sacred. Sometimes, we travel around and we like to visit other fire departments and show our badge and sit and schmooze and learn what they're doing and stuff like that. And that's great. I've visited firehouses all over the place, but I have not had the chance, unfortunately, to get to Emmitsburg yet. But I know that the first time I went back to New York, where our daughter was living at that time, and she wanted to take me finally down to the memorial. It was probably one of the most, and I've officiated because of my background in Judaism and in the ritual side of it. I've officiated at a couple of hundred funerals and unveilings, and I keep myself together. But taking that first step into ground zero, I lost it. And to me, this was because I knew some of the firefighters. I knew I met and corresponded with the Jewish fire captain from FDNY. I bumped into him by accident. In the city the year before, and we kind of connected and we sent some emails back and forth. And I said, "Oh, good. Well, I get to see this guy again when my next trip up to New York." Never knowing that was not going to happen. So going there and finding his name was very important to me. And so I think that one of the things that I want our viewers and listeners to take away is this program is basically as serious as it comes if you want to be a leader in the fire service. And it is not, this is not having a good time hanging out with a frat or the sorority. This is your devotion and taking time away from your department and your family to put in the time necessary to take your classes, do your research, create your papers, and understand that every step you take in this program is going to make you a better fire officer. Not every rung is easy to reach. The first time you threw a 24-foot ladder is different than the first time you threw a 35-foot ladder. They're both ladders, they're both aluminum, but there was a big difference in throwing them. This is a big difference for your studies for most of you. You've gone to some of the national conferences, the 2 big national conferences. You've been to regional conferences. You've been to your local conferences. And they're good, and you learn, and we have great instructors all around this country and in North America. But this program is a focused program to make you the best you can be, but it can't change you. You have to be willing to devote the time and effort for this program. So let's talk about, especially since we're on the today, but let's talk about today with the changing face of the fire service, the difficulties we're having in retaining firefighters, both career and volunteer, and WUI now as well. And yet we're looking at a WUI season that has already blown up in one of the earliest times of the year in March. Mid-March was our first big fire. And now we have the fire in New Mexico. I have family in Albuquerque, so I'm worried about them. And we have a couple of the other fires to go in. And yet we don't have enough wildland firefighters to put out there. How do you see, Bud, how do you see where the EFO today can help today's fire department towards tomorrow?
Well, I really do believe that it is a leadership course, and if you are going to lead a department or even aspire to leading a department, you're going to have to look at the future and see where the fire service is headed. Now, we've been on the fire service for a long time, and we've seen major changes, but we've also seen the change in the attitude of the firefighters themselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, the firefighters of today are really looking at it, from my perspective anyway, looking at it more as a job as opposed to a dedication. And in our days, it was a dedication. We weren't getting paid what they're getting paid today. It is a job to them, and they treat it as a job. But I really do think that the EFO today is going to have to be charged with a task of getting these people convinced that they want to follow through on this type of program. And I think that's going to be a real challenge.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one? Because I feel very strong about that as well.
I think, but as I can remember the early days, when I first came in the fire service, there was no such thing as any kind of formal training other than the regular fire training, which in my case as a volunteer didn't even need. And that was back, we were still using Chemox breathing apparatus. But the theory at the time was also that if you're a great firefighter, you'll make a great chief. And I think that attitude prevailed for a very long time. And as promotions, the process has changed through the years, you began to see the mix between experience and education as education became more available. At least in my experience, my very first experience at the academy was an eye-opener. And every experience after that was just more eye-opening. But the first EFO class was the first time that I was able to understand that as a chief fire officer, you just can't go to the council and say, we fight fire and save lives, throw money at us. EFO opened me up to the entire world and everything around it that, unbeknownst to me, we actually had a role in and operated in. So it's not just making better fire officers, it's making people, firefighters, understand that they operate not in a singular world, but in the total world. And as we know today, it's almost global. EFO brought in students from all around the world, which was again an eye opener. So it's when you're talking about these major brush fires and the biggest problems we're facing today, again, it's a global situation, and the fire chief has to be able to think beyond the uniform, the apparatus, his own or her own personal budget. Fire department, but they got to see the bigger picture, and the EFO started that, I think, at least in my opinion. And most of the people that I went to school with, because it was a fairly new program, were in the same boat. We sat there in class all day long with our eyes like this because we just never envisioned that role, and that's what EFO did. So much of the EFO program was not specifically fire department related. I mean, you guys remember the case studies. Mm-hmm. We did case studies on things like the Titanic, the Gettysburg battles, and things that has zero to do with the fire service. Yet, in dealing with it, it just opened up the world to us and realized we can do a lot better job at our primary job, which was not firefighting. It was managing and leading. And that's what I got out of the EFO program, amongst many other things. And I have no doubt that I would never have made it as far as I did had it not been for that, and not just the education, but the opening of the opening the mind and the eyes to the broader horizons. There's no way to explain how much of an impact that had on me, and I know a lot of people in my genre, if you will.
Right, right. Yeah, I know that although I had never planned on being a firefighter, I always admired them. I met my first one when I was 7 years old, and made my parents take me to the firehouses in our community. And then when I rode my bike around, then when I could drive, I drove all around Greater Boston and visited firehouses. But for me, it happened by accident at a volunteer department. And I just spent, I've only been married a couple of years. We had no kids yet. My wife was working full time as well. And so I was one of those people who came in with no background in the fire service. I could use tools. I was okay with tools, saws, screwdrivers, wrenches. That I was fine with. But I had never done anything with the fire service. And I was really hesitant when I received the invitation from the chief when I was just visiting the station for the very first time. And the funny thing was that I had a beard then. And he said, and I was a college graduate, so they didn't have any other college graduates in this department right outside of Greensboro. And he said, Mr. Green, I think you'll make a great firefighter. You just have to take one step closer to that razor blade that you hold in your hand. And we were lucky we had Scott packs. And it was right around that time that the state of North Carolina started the North Carolina State Fire College. And next thing I know, following April, 7 months later from joining, I'm picked by the chief, along with my friend who I mentioned before we went on the air, and one of our caretakers, to get firefighter 1 done. Even though I had done training, I already been on the nozzle on 4 working fires in those 7 months. But I said, why me, chief? I mean, you got all these other people. I just joined. You got to take care of the people who've already been here. He goes, no, I want you and Richard and Roger to go. Okay. So we went that year, did basic fireman. Next summer, he sent us again, did hydraulics and pumping. Third year, Rich and I did high-level rescue, and our friend Roger did captain's training. But we never knew why. So I was lucky enough several years ago to be in North Carolina, and my friend Roger said, have you seen the chief? And I said, is he still around? He says, oh yeah, he's still living in the same house across the street. I went to visit him, and it was a great reunion, not having seen him in probably 30 years. And we're sitting down and drinking sweet tea. And he said, do you ever wonder why I said you and Richard to the State Fire College? I said, Chief, every time we're together, we talk about it. Why the hell did you send two jokers like us to go? He said, because I knew you boys were going to be officers in this department. I knew from the moment you joined that you boys were going to do that. And I was he says, I kind of knew that you might not stay around, Stephen, but I was really hoping Richard would. But he left his semester early because he took a police position in DC where he was born and raised. But that opened my eyes. And after that, there was someplace else. It must have been in one of the trades. I read about the EFO. And I know how hard I worked in the nonprofit sector to be an executive director or COO of several synagogues. But when I saw the EFO and I read about it, I said, that's where Chief Wilson, that was the target that he was probably aiming Richard and I for, that he saw us going in, even as volunteers, getting trained. And, I really got a lot out of the training in injury because of a partner who didn't know, a different partner who didn't know what to do as backing up the nozzle guy. But I knew that the EFO would have been something I would have wanted to do to better myself, even if I wasn't a firefighter anymore. And that's where I want to go, Helen, what made you, as a non-firefighter, as a civilian, want to go through the program?
Well, I was very fortunate to have a very progressive fire chief in Austin, Ed Kirkham. And he hired me when I had I'd never worked in my life. And I'd lost my husband. I had 2 small children to raise. And we happened to go to the same church. And he said, Helen, would you like a part-time job at the fire department? I started out on the lowest rung you can start on as a clerk typist. I went on to be his personal secretary, his assistant chief, and his executive assistant. And when he decided early on in the EFO program, he wanted all of his district chiefs in the department to participate in that program, and he equated my position to that of the district chiefs. So that's how I got in. And to back up a little bit, I want to give a shout out to all the classes that I know both the chiefs and I took before we got to the EFO program. And the one that stands out in my mind is interpersonal dynamics.
Oh, yeah.
My goodness, did we learn who we were or what?
Yeah.
I mean, it changed my life. And I took back from that to the department, and we did a lot of that interpersonal stuff at the chief's level in the department. And I'll be forever grateful to him for seeing something in me that I certainly didn't see in myself. And
That's great.
I'll tote the banner for EFO as long as I can talk about fire service.
Sure.
You know, Chief Rubin Dennis Rubin has been a frequent guest and a great friend and supporter of the podcast. And I remember in one of them, we talked about, he says, a chief has to concentrate on his members. Yes, you have the budgets and you have equipment and you have all this other stuff. He says, but if you don't have an eye and a good eye on how your members get along and what they do around, when the chores are done and the training is done for that day on that tour, if you don't know that as the chief of department, how they interact with each other, not just on the fire ground, but when they're living together, 24 on, 48 off, whatever it is, or even volunteers, he says you're missing one of the most important parts of leadership. And I think what the three of you are saying really back that up. And what you just said about taking a course in interpersonal dynamics. Who would think, no, I got to learn how to do, flammable liquids. I got to come up with something with flammable liquids. I got a hazmat team I got to take. No, it's that, because if that team, and this is what happened with me, this is how I got hurt, is that this young man I was paired with at this training session, we had live burns. We're out in Easton, North Carolina, and he was part of a public safety department. I don't know if you know, public safety is you're both fire and police at the same time. So you have to carry your bunker gear in your trunk and patrol, and then you get dispatched. He loved the police work, but he hated anything to do with fire. But they made him come to the school. So since I had most experience on the line in just 7 months, I was the last one to be able to be on the nozzle from the four teams, four twos. And so when this young man, he was on the nozzle, I was there backing him up. I learned how to back up the nozzle man, and we did a good knockdown. That was done. Then we took the break, came back, it was going to be my turn. This will be the last burn. So I said to him, I said, remember, tapped him on the shoulder. I said, remember how I pushed towards you to help take that back pressure off? Because I need you to do the same for me. You got to do it. Okay. He says, yeah. Mask up. Lieutenant sets off the burn. He wants to wait because it's the final burn. He goes, Steve, I want to cook a little bit, really give you something to do. He says, okay, open the nozzle. Just as I'm opening the nozzle, the bells start ringing. So I take my right hand, put it on my regulator, because that's what we had in those days. And it wasn't, my bells weren't ringing, and the lieutenant tested his bell would ring. Suddenly I'm hearing from behind me, I'm out of air, I'm gonna die, I'm out of air, I'm gonna die in here. And he rips off his mask yelling, I'm gonna die, I'm out of air. Rips off his mask, bails out. By this point in time, I have the bail almost totally open. And we're flowing 1.25 on an inch and a half in those days. So I couldn't let go of the hose. I would have killed the lieutenant. So I tucked in and went low and kept it close to me. And there had been previous burns in there, and my left leg fell through a hole in the floor. Just my left leg, all the way down to my hip. My right leg bent backwards. And the pain in my knee, I blew out my knee when I went through the floor, and it just was excruciating. Subsequently, and he never apologized. I didn't even think I was going to graduate. I went to the graduation, but I didn't think I'd graduate because I didn't get to actually put the fire, although I did put the fire up by myself. But I went there, and he saw the three of us walking, and me on crutches, because they had shot me off to the hospital, but they couldn't just put an immobilizer on. And we was waiting to see, my two friends were waiting to see if he was going to come over and say, I'm sorry that happened. I should have known better. Not a word, nothing. So when you look at the interpersonal dynamic, that's one of the first things I experienced negatively in the fire service. I've had people, another firefighter who was supposed to be, I was pulling the nozzle, he was supposed to be taking care of the spaghetti. And when we put out the fire, and I turned around to thank him, it wasn't him, it was somebody else. And I asked the captain, is so-and-so okay? He says, yeah, but go talk to the chief. So I went to the chief. I said, is so-and-so okay? He goes, yeah, but he had a little tough time. That was pretty good fire, and he wasn't comfortable doing that. I said, well, you're not going to throw him out of the department. He goes, no, hell no. He'll work on the fire ground. He'll do ladders and stuff like that. And that was something else that I learned from that chief, that even if you can't make entry as a firefighter, and because we're mostly a volunteer department, he wanted to make use of him and keep him in and keep him an active member. And to me, that was great leadership, because I know in a lot of today's atmosphere, as we mentioned a little bit a while ago, that would be it. You'd be out. That would be the end of it. And the fact that you folks learn about interpersonal dynamics as part of a firefighting class, basically, fire officer class, makes it totally different. And I'm hoping that this is getting to our viewers and listeners what type of a program this is and how it shapes you to be, gives you the knowledge and the experience in your 4 years, 5 years, whatever it takes, to be the very best fire leader, no matter what your rank is, but be the very best fire leader that you possibly can, because lives and property are going to depend at some point on you.
I think that the interpersonal dynamics element, as Helen said, it was a pretty intense class with a lot of work involved in it. But I saw as a result of it, two sides of it. With respect to my personnel, I didn't have to walk around pushing the bugle in front of me to get them to do things. We worked as a team, and then when I had to step out of that role to address council or the civilian part that affected our job, I could do that. I could step out of the uniform and talk to them in their language, at their level, whatever it was. And that interpersonal dynamics did that. And the EFO program, which just took that element and just elevated it step by step, it made that happen. Makes the fire chief work outside of the box that we were in for, century and a half or so. So it was just a significant experience. I don't think there's anything like it. I don't think 4-year college didn't do it. I mean, it was a lot of classes, a lot of good times, a lot of learning and so forth. But nothing like the EFO program that took people that had common interests and just blew their world wide open for them. And I think another thing that I think is indicative of the value of the program is Helen herself. I mean, she said a civilian, her chief, plus the academy, plus the instructors, plus everybody else recognized that there was a place for her in this class. Her being a civilian who doesn't wear a uniform, doesn't give orders like a sergeant. It was,
Yes, she does.
and that's what it did, and it just everything fit right there.
Bud knows I did.
But you know, and of course, when I was going through it, Helen was the only civilian we knew, but I'm sure there's been a whole lot
And
of
the only female in the class.
Exactly.
Not just
and I know
civilian.
there's been plenty since then, but
Yeah.
also it made me realize too that there are other elements in the jurisdiction that impact fire protection system, like code enforcers and building people that aren't firefighters, and they had a place in that class too. There was a EFO was for them as well. Yep.
And we all remember those prevention classes that, you know,
We hated.
they weren't one of our favorites, but
Right.
Don Mano managed to make us on fire
God, yeah.
about fire prevention.
Yeah.
When he would come in there running up and down the aisleways of the classroom, I mean, it's like he was so fired up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can honestly say EFO changed my life, like you said. And it was not just professionally, but personally. I mean, my whole life changed and revolved around it. And again, we were in the early days, so it was new to everybody. But if I was still on a job today, I would be looking at recruits to start grooming them for that job and that level of training in their careers.
Right. They don't need to be dropped into it. They need to work up to it.
Yep. There was, I can remember at one time the EFO was restricted to chief officers. And there was a lot of discussion about them not being the appropriate target audience. The target audience ought to be the folks that want to be chief officers.
Right.
And I think eventually it started to open up. But again, that thought was there that this is where they need to be going in this direction.
Yeah, we don't need to be getting it at the end of our careers. We need it at the beginning.
Yep.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And so we, you know, if you're a listener or reviewer right now, and you're just a firefighter, but you have aspirations, not to be a boss, you have aspirations to be a leader, in the field. And so
That's
just
when to
because
start.
it says executive fire officer doesn't mean that a rank and file firefighter can't take the class.
Exactly.
If you want to take the class and put the time into it, then, you know, it's there for you. It's there for you.
The EFO program eventually required a bachelor's degree to get in the program. And we are, I'm sure by now, we're seeing more and more and more entry-level firefighters with bachelor's degrees. So at that point, they've already got the minimum requirements. That's the time to start working them so that when they step into the job, they're ready to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because, you know, if you look at the trades, they're full of ads from universities that are offering various fire science degrees. And, and I think over the last decade, maybe decade and a half, that has really exploded. And it's wonderful because even before COVID, they were allowing some of these firefighters to do remote learning to get these bachelor degrees and then do their papers and send them in. And it wasn't that they needed the necessarily the college experience of living on campus, which is great, if, you know, depending on school and stuff like that, what your aims are. But it allows you to learn to better yourself in the field that you've chosen now.
Exactly. Yep.
And if you've taken the time to get a bachelor's degree in fire science, fire service management, whatever it's in that's fire service related, you've already shown at that point a dedication to a task. And you're just out of the academy, but you've already proven that you're dedicated to the task because you took 4 years and got a degree, which is way different today than it was. Like I said, back in my day, I was the first college graduate to ever go to this station that was 80 something years old. You know, but to me, you know, I didn't start swagging around because I didn't know jack about the fire service. So or I could help with fundraising or things like that. I didn't know anything else, but I was open to learning everything and spent as much time as I could down at the firehouse to learn and to learn each truck and to get certified as a driver. And I just wanted to be the best volunteer that I possibly could. And, you know, I think today there are a lot of firefighters who really if you look at social media, on the good side of social media, there are some great firefighters out there who are helping their communities, who are trying to do everything they can to improve. They're running training programs, or they're passing the word out on social media about training program that's coming up, or it's available, and things like that. And I think we all too often look at social media in a negative light, and there's plenty of negativity to it. There's no doubt about it. But if we look at it in a positive manner, you know, I have nearly, between the two major accounts with Twitter and Instagram, nearly 5,000 followers, which isn't a lot.
Wow.
For me, I was hoping if I got, you know, 5-10 listeners, I was going to be a happy guy when they pushed me into doing this podcast. And then I wound up with having it listened to in over 40 countries around the world, which again, I never expected. But I've always tried to, being here and having been a leader in civilian life, I always try to bring the best to this show, to this program, this podcast, because my job isn't really to entertain. My job is to inform and educate. I've been a lifelong educator since I was 13 years old. I've been teaching. And so I am one of those people who shout in every podcast, in every meeting, that you need to, if you're going to be a good firefighter, you have to always be open to learn. You can never close that door. Chief Phillips, let me ask you about your experience with EFO and what you've seen it do subsequently to getting your official notation.
Well, I come from a state in New York where basically they don't really want to step outside of New York. That's why I became the first EFO graduate from New York. But I think the bottom line was that it opened the door, or opened my eyes to what is happening in other places in the country, which until that time, we were pretty isolated in New York. It's like you do it the New York way or you don't do it.
Excuse me, what part of New York were you in?
In Rochester.
Oh, I was working, I did 4 years outside of Syracuse. So
Okay.
we're very close, yeah.
Well, pretty much the same though.
Right,
And
very much.
And it opened the door to us, for me anyway, to go see what other people are doing around the country and to bring that back to my organization, which led us to become accredited and open the door to our people to go to different places for different learning experiences. But I had coffee with the chief the other day, with the new chief, and he's wondering how he can get his people motivated to go for training because he's having a hard time getting anybody to want to go to training. So I told him to start sending people to the National Fire Academy for some of these other classes, and they'll eventually get to the point where they think, okay, what's the next step? And the next step is taking courses in management and EFO. And I think that clearly it changed like Nelson and Helen said, it changed my whole focus of the fire service, and it helped me to become a good chief as I grew within the organization.
That's an important point, because I think you hit on the fact that all too often our fire leaders are myopic, and they only see a small little circle of their department. They don't see the big picture, and all they see is slices. All right, I got personnel management, I got budgeting, I got to deal with the city or the village, I got to take care of the building, I got apparatus, but they're all individualized and compartmentalized. What you're saying is, all three of you are saying, is basically this course pulled you back and gave you the full view of what a fire service leader has to be concerned with and the best way of leading it. And, you know, I can certainly understand the chief there saying what he said, because One of the things that we do is we usually conduct 3 webinars a year to help raise funds for our nonprofit, because we give cash disbursements to our brothers or sisters and or their families in dire need. And most of our money so far, over $3,000, has gone to the families of 6, 7 brothers that we've lost since October 2020 when we started. And one of the things we tell them at the opening of the webinar is, we need you not only to listen and pay attention to this webinar, but you need to take it back to your department. You have to show them what you learned. Tell them what you saw from the presenters, whether they used PowerPoint or they didn't, whatever. Just take what you learned back and share it with 1 or 2 of your friends. Spread it around. Spread it around and get that information out. Because otherwise, we say to them, you're operating in a vacuum. You're one person in your department at this webinar. Where's the rest of your gang? Tickets are $20. That's all they are. And it's a tax deductible donation anyway. So just instead of just one, next time, bring others with you. Invite a friend or 2 to come to the webinar with you. Our last one we just did was fire behavior and reading smoke. And we had over 70 attendees at this one, and it was great. And we've had several demands for the copy of those who got toned out while they were watching and things like that. But our purpose is there to educate in those webinars, and we don't do it ourselves. Although my 2 partners are both instructors. One of them is Battalion Chief Andy Starnes with Charlotte Fire. Andy is also one of our leading experts on using thermal imaging cameras today. He knows them inside out and backwards. And Nick Higgins, who's the editor of the Firehouse Tribune, who's an instructor in New Jersey. They do instruct, but we feel that our job is to find presenters from the national group who will teach the particular topics that we're looking at and know it really well, so that our attendees really get a bang for their buck. And I think that while it's tiny compared to the EFO, I think that those who come to, and we have some repeat customers, that's what I like seeing. We've had several repeat customers. And those who come to our webinar, when they've been in touch with me subsequently, they're all fired up by it, pardon the pun, but they really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And that's what, I don't really, yes, I'm looking about the money that we bring in, but for an attendee to say, Steve, that was a great webinar. I learned so much about how to read smoke. I just knew it was gray and white, that black, that was me. I learned so much about reading smoke. I'm taking it back. And I got permission from the chief to share it in a class. So that's what our program is all about. And we're just a teeny tiny fraction of how much the EFO program can offer to any firefighter who has that interest. And like you said, though, the chief is having a problem getting them to go to a training. As a teacher and educator, you have to find the right training niche that first time. You have to get, it might even be something fun, but but you can still teach with fun. I mean, I've taught in the classroom for 50 years. And not everything is fun and exciting, but if you turn it a little bit and you make it a little bit exciting, a little bit more interesting, and you grab, sometimes it's almost contagious. You got 1 or 2 start listening, and then another one tries to talk to them. Shh, shh, I'm listening to it. You are? Yeah. Wait, listen to it and pay attention. If you can entice them, that's how they start they didn't need to take that first step down the path.
Yeah, but I think that the problem we have today is like with everything else. There are so many other things going on in people's lives that to say you got to go someplace for 2 weeks,
right?
A lot of younger firefighters don't want to commit to 2 weeks. I mean, they'll do a day, they'll do 2 days, but they don't want to do 2 weeks.
Right.
But if I could go back to just what Helen said about the interpersonal dynamics and the fire prevention program, we didn't like the fire prevention one, but it also it opened my eyes anyway to how to get involved in politics, because we as a class stood up to the academy because they basically said we couldn't go to Washington for the introduction of the caucus, of the Congressional Fire Caucus. And we as a class basically said we want to go to it, and we're the leaders, the future leaders of the fire service. So can you make it happen? Well, Don Mano, our instructor, didn't want to cause many waves within the organization, but he found us a bus and we ended up going to the caucus. But we did that, and we actually made a certificate or a proclamation to give to the Congress that basically said that we were backing the caucus, and that caucus is still in place today.
Yeah.
So, but we got to go to it only because of our persistence, and it was bringing everybody together from across the country. Some people called their congressman to get their congressman to vote for it or go for it. And Helen was the real leader in that one too.
Well, we had a little Texas connection, if you remember.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, you know what? We're going to take a break
Okay.
here, folks. All right, Helen,
Yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's probably time for us to take a little break, right?
Okay, so we're going to take a little break. If you're watching the video, you're not going to see anything different. If you're listening to the audio, well, you know what's going to happen. We're going to take a little break. You'll hear the music. You'll hear a couple of PSAs, and then we'll be right back with our guest, Helen Johnson, Chief Nelson Pyle, and Chief Harold Bud Phillips, right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. Hello, and welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. This is part 2 of our program on the EFO, the Executive Fire Officer. And my guests today are Helen Johnson and Chief Nelson Pyle and Chief Harold Bud Phillips, all of whom have the title of EFO, Executive Fire Officer. And we've been talking about some of the real important stuff that this course will offer to bring to you that you probably never even thought of as related to the fire service. And we were just talking about one of the courses that took a great deal of research. Chief Powell, do you want to bring that up again, please?
Sure. One of the classes was called Strategic Analysis of Executive Leadership, and was primarily a case study program. And it was just such an eye-opener because and I can remember clearly the case study we did was John Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs, and then subsequently handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the differences. And I don't remember how much time we spent on that. And it's worth noting too that the EFO program, their classes, like all the NFA classes, are billed as 80-hour courses for 2 weeks. 80 hours didn't even touch the EFO. You do your 8 hours in class, and then it's hours in the evening doing the homework. But the analysis of the leadership styles, not only of Kennedy, but of all the people that surrounded him, and the differences. You spend so much time analyzing it, and when you walk away from it, you think to yourself, boy, there's so much more to this than just saying, I'm the chief, do it my way because I said so kind of thing. Especially when you're up against situations are either going to be controversial, difficult to make a decision to make anybody happy, all those kinds of things. And then you take this lesson you've learned from executive leadership to deal with the issue. It's just mind-boggling in my opinion. It just blew me away. I was so impressed with it, and it made such a difference in my entire professional life, and even in cases sometimes at home. My daughter wrecked her car one time. I could have been the father and yelled at her about it and all that kind of stuff, but there was something I picked up that taught me, and I handled it a whole lot differently. I had a hell of a lot better result for it.
That's
So
great.
it was just an amazing experience.
That's really good to hear. And so for you, our listeners, our viewers, if you haven't picked up on it yet, we're trying to convince you how important it is to take that EFO course. If you want to
If
be
I
a
could-
leader in the fire service.
I think too, it's worth noting that none of the EFO classes were start and finish programs. They were programs that you walked away from with the background to take it on. A lot of what the Society of Executive Fire Officers was created for and picked up on. But the point is that it didn't just say, okay, you're done the class, here's your ticket. You've learned all you need to know. It was basically a stepping stone that the certificate says you were able to get the stepping stone, but now you're going to take it a step further through the rest of your career. So, and I always appreciated that too. It wasn't just I learned something, take it home and put it in a book somewhere.
Yeah, that's very important. Again, like you said, you got to take it home with you and then use it.
Use it and build on it.
Right.
Build on it. Everything was buildable.
All right. So with Chief Phillips, we talked a little bit about in the first segment the problem that we're having today with personnel, number of personnel in our career departments, in our volunteer departments, in WUI. So with that, facing that problem, facing budget constraints, facing, again, as Chief Phillips talked about, that people don't want to spend the time away. And you're right, life is totally different. When I joined in 77, it was just my wife and me. There were no kids. There were no after-school programs, basically. Once in a while, there might be something, but there wasn't soccer. There wasn't anything else going on. And so family life was different. My wife worked because she wanted to work. I mean, she'd been a teacher. She wanted to teach. So she always did that. But today, everything's turned upside down. Usually both parents are working full-time. One of them might be working another part-time job, or both might be working part-time jobs as well as their full-time jobs. Plus they got to take the kids to the doctor appointment, dentist appointments, take them to soccer, take them to piano lessons, whatever the case may be. And they don't have that same time that I had, or we had back in the 70s, in the early 80s. So how can we get across the message that we've talked about the past, the EFO in the past, we've now talked about it in the present. How do you folks see the EFO for the future, and might the EFO be one of the tools that a chief or department can use to kind of bring in the right people, and as you said, Chief, to start grooming them? Because I don't believe that anybody is ever born a leader. You either grow into it or you've been tended to. I've always seen it. If you're a good leader, you spot a ripe seed, and then you take it and you put it in a little bit of dirt, put a little bit of water, stick it in the window, and then you see a sprout. 3 days later, a little green sprout. So you change it to a larger pot, and you take it and you tend it, and next thing you know, you have a beautiful sunflower standing 8 feet tall. But that's because you took care of it. And I think a good leader can spot other people who are in the department who might be able to be leadership material, and then start to groom them, not so that they stand out from everybody else, but just to groom them and kind of steer their interests into a more serious approach to being a fire service leader. So where do we see it going for tomorrow? Where will be the EFO 5 years from today, or 10 years, do you think?
Well, I think what they want to do, and I don't really think it's the way to go, is make it one of those courses where you can sit down at home and take the course. I really don't see the benefit of doing that as much as I do getting everybody together for the interpersonal connection that they have with each other and learning about what's happening around the rest of the country. So I think from a chief's perspective, we need to groom the people that we see as potential leaders and convince them that they need to settle down and gain some of this insight from courses like the EFO program and convince them to go take the program. But to take the program away from the academy and put it online is going to hurt the program.
Agree with that.
I would agree. I would agree as well from everything I've heard. I mean, And again, we're all of us have been teachers as leaders in one manner or another, and we saw what happened with the pandemic, and we had to go to Zoom, and we saw the changes with the kids in school from elementary school, middle school, right up through high school, and even in college. A couple of friends of mine who are college instructors. And I would tend to agree, this is not the kind of course that should be online. There could be a pre part of the course that you could do online, but when it's time to take the time for the course itself, I think it is, you need that interpersonal interchange with other people, not just your teachers, but your classmates. Because you have to react together. Maybe we can work together and find out what the story was that they're looking for in that curve on the Titanic or whatever, but you work together to do it. And you socialize. And one of the things that people don't realize is you can learn when you socialize. You don't have to socialize in a classroom, but you can learn when you socialize and spend time with other people.
Well, we've learned a lot from each other over the years. And just like now, the three of us, we've all we wouldn't have known each other if it weren't for this course.
Ain't that the truth?
And we're friends forever.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Well, the academy has always pushed the interpersonal relationships after class for all their classes. They always have. But a lot of the programs, and most importantly, the EFO program, a lot of that after hours work required team effort. So you had to get groups together, which you can't do online. And one of the biggest things I got from my association with the Academy is that I learned that I didn't have to have the answers to all the questions. I never had a problem telling somebody I don't know, but I always said, but I can find out, because I knew somebody in this country that could probably answer my question for me. And that came from the Academy. I've met so many people over so many years that I knew that there was no problem I'd come up against that I couldn't find somebody to help me solve it, which would never have happened without the Academy.
I had a young neighbor who lived a couple of houses down from us, who was a junior member of our volunteer department outside of Syracuse in Onondaga County. And when he finally reached 18, he was able to become a full member. And we were going on toned out on a second alarm fire at a fast food restaurant, but we were just going to be doing overhaul when we got there. That was the dispatch. But I made sure everybody put their air packs on and tested them. And we're driving to the next town over. And we're driving, all of a sudden I hear somebody's bells going off. And look over, it's the kid. He never took his mask off. He sucked down the whole tank in the back of the rescue.
We've all done that.
So I talked to him about it afterwards, nicely. I told him he didn't. We just tested it. We don't have to keep it on the ride there. But he had a few difficult times in his first few months there, and something clicked with him. And I don't know exactly what it was, but he decided to enroll at the National Fire Academy for the basic fire course. He came back a firefighter. This kid came back a firefighter. And that's when I saw the power of that school. That this kid who was fumbly and bumbly and overexcited to do anything, now learned tactics and the right way of doing things and how to be a good firefighter. And for the remaining time that I was at the department, he was terrific. He really was. He was great. And he went on to work for the city, got hired by the city of Syracuse as well. So there's no doubt in my mind the value that you're sharing with us about the academy itself. Even at the lowest level, the academy is a great place to learn. If you want to learn about firefighting and being a good firefighter, that's the place. And there are all sorts of courses and programs that you can take. But we're trying to tell you that you should set your goal with classes you take, that you want to set your goal for the EFO.
I think too that partly to address Bud's issue about how do you motivate people. I think it's important that the chief, whoever's in charge, has a clear image of what they want in their department, what they want their people to do, and they project that image. And that can also be done through a departmental plan, if you will. If a recruit comes in brand new right off the street, can look at this plan and say, "This, if I want to do anything in the department, I want to go to this level. Here's what I need to do." And somebody in the department is responsible, and I'll call it an education officer for lack of a better term. But if I'm the recruit and I want to be a lieutenant, and this chart tells me here's what I have to do to be a lieutenant, there's somebody in the department I can go to and talk about that. What does all this entail? What is the National Fire Academy? What is EFO? Somebody in the department who has been there and done that can explain all that. So the individual from the recruit level on up can say, I want to do this, I want to do that, and here's what I have to do. And, some of it has to be self-motivated. They got to want to do that.
Right.
But the department pushes it as though this is really the great thing. I can remember the days when none of that existed. If you wanted to get promoted, you just simply waited till the test came around, took a test, and see how you did. We've come a long, long way from that. And it has to be an organizational effort. It can't be just the chief or just the recruit that wants to be chief someday. It's got to be an organizational, part of the culture of the organization.
Right.
The training
Sure.
is everything. Major part of it. EFO, NFA, the whole thing. They all have their places, and here's where it fits. So that would go a long way to help solve some of that motivation problem. The other thing too, and Bud alluded to it earlier, our today's recruits are different than when we were. Well, like he said, when we were there, it wasn't just a job; it was a way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in my own department, over the years, we used to work a long hours, and then FLSA came along, said you got to shorten the hours up or pay overtime and so forth, and things changed. Schedules change. I know in my department, they went to 24-hour, 72-hour shift, 1 day on, 3 days off. It got it down to a 40-hour work week, something close to that. 24 on, 72 off. When I first came on a job, it was 1 on and 48 off. So it's come a long way. But the problem I see that it's created is that those kinds of schedules turn the fire job into a part-time job. And a regular job is what they're doing the other 3 days they're off. So that becomes part of the motivational problem. When they can make so much money as a firefighter working 1 day out of 4, and the other 3 days they're making 2 or 3 times that much money, it's very difficult to motivate them.
It is.
So again, a clear plan is here. It is in front of you. You take advantage of it. Will help you all the way. It would go a long way, I think.
Yeah, organizational skills. That's what it is. The leader has to have those organizational skills, or get the help to have them, so that he or she can follow through with what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Helen, did you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to go back to the volunteer part that we were talking about a while ago, because we did have a volunteer chief from Wisconsin in our whole EFO program. And it meant so much to him to be in that class. And I don't know if he was the first volunteer chief to graduate EFO or not, but I'm going to tell this little story, hopefully not emotionally, to tell everybody what it meant to Tom Van Evenhoven to have been an EFO graduate. We had our annual symposium for EFO graduates. Tom was a graduate. From his deathbed, he flew to Emmitsburg. But and I took care of him. That's how important it was.
Wow.
Tom.
That's amazing. That really is.
And he was the first volunteer as a graduate.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's so if you're a volunteer or part pay, paid on call, you're not excluded. This program can be for everybody. Volunteer, career, whatever. You can take this program. If you can fit it into your schedule and you can make it work, you will come out not only a better firefighter, but I think as all three of our guests have said, you come out as a better person in general.
Goes beyond the fire service. So whatever the volunteer does when they're not in the fire station, the EFO program is going to affect that
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 right?
element of their life. There's no no doubt about that in my mind.
Yeah,
Yeah, it affects your home life and everything.
Yep.
You know, I think the fire service in general does that. You know, I only got to put in 8 years before I got hurt, but I've always defined myself ever since 1985 as a former firefighter.
Well, Steve, I left the fire department at 17 years, but everything I learned at the National Fire Academy made me a better commissioner for the firefighters pension fund, made me know how to deal from the governor's office to giving budget proposals to the Senate Finance Committee. It served me well after those 10 years to go as the executive director of the State Firefighters and Fire Marshals Association, where I had paid and volunteer. And one of my messages was always the National Fire Academy. So it's not just, it's for the leaders in whatever part of the fire service you're in.
Right. And I think
Well,
that's.
if I could just add to that,
Sure, Chief.
Nelson was the president of EFOP, which was the Executive Fire Officer Program. And it was by watching him as a leader of that organization that caused me to want to get into a leadership position in that organization too. Which, again, I did become the vice chair of it for a number of years, but it did open the door and it did open the eyes of a lot of people that, okay, we needed a bigger audience, actually, is what we needed. So that's why we joined the International Association of Fire Chiefs as a section. But it was all Nelson who led us in that direction and started it, and we just completed that movement. But that was a way that we were able to stay together as an organization and still together today as an organization.
How many members would you estimate you have today who are EFOs?
Well, the only way you can be in the EFO section of the International is you need to be a graduate, and there's 1,400.
Oh, so 1,400 graduates from the EFO program.
Well, there's 1,400 that are in the
Members.
Yeah,
that are members.
not more. Yeah.
Oh,
We
that are
started
members.
out.
Okay.
We started out with about 300 or 400, but in the early days, and it's gone that high. Yeah.
No. So there might even be some who are EFOs that just didn't join the
Oh, yeah.
It may not. Yeah, sure.
organization. Yeah. Well, that's still a lot of people who took the time and put in the effort to learn and improve themselves. And the fact that all three of you have shared the fact that not only did it help you in your work with the fire service, but it helped you in your life, in your day-to-day life, and how you looked at things and how you accepted things and judged things. Your whole mind was opened up because of all the study and the courses that you took and the research that you did. And from each of you, I said this before coming back on the air, I said to Helen, I said, I regret that it's not something that I did. I would have loved to have done that now that I know much more about it. You know, it's
One of the problems at hand is that we're all gone now. And a lot of the people that took the courses did it because they listened to us. I mean, we promoted the program. And now we need to find more people out there that are still involved in the fire service to promote the program. which there don't seem to be a lot of those people around right now.
Well, I'm not sure if they're not around or they're just not making themselves known. Again, our day-to-day operations for departments has changed so dramatically over the last 20, 25 years.
Absolutely.
But
You know,
point Helen made about still touting, and she'll forever tout the academy. Been gone now
Yeah.
pushing 20 years, and here we are sitting here today.
Yeah, still doing
exactly
it.
that. Yep. So, and if I can, if I could take a minute to kind of emphasize the program, the executive fire officers, the idea was formed originally, and correct me if I'm wrong, Helen, back when the Carter administration funded the academy as a result of the America Burning paper. That's when everything began to occur. And there was talk, if I'm not mistaken, during the Reagan administration that the academy was going to be zero funded. And we were a big concern about that. And that's what drove the formation of the executive fire officers. Our intention was to be a voice for the academy when obviously the employees and the people there could not. So we were kind of, our voice was for the entire academy. Well, once that subsided, then we began refocusing our efforts on enhancing and supporting the EFO program itself, because as I mentioned before, they weren't just a series of classes, start to finish and you're done. They were stepping stones. And so the executive fire officer organization started doing our symposiums in October, where the academy was doing EFO symposiums in, was it April or May?
Mhm.
So 2 times a year, there were symposiums that were specifically designed to carry the EFO program beyond the 4 weeks. So, and as far as I know, a lot of that is still going on.
Mhm.
So again, the program is here to stay, I think, because we all know that our environment changes daily. The fire service has changed. So there has to be an educational mechanism there to keep up with that. Because if you don't, you're going to be behind it. It doesn't take but a day's lapse and you're behind the 8 ball, or you're behind the curve again. So EFO, I think, is here to stay. And I agree with Bud. They can't just simply dump it online.
Right.
It has to be interaction, concentrated interaction, not 2 or 3 hours a night when you can get online. It's got to be 2 weeks, whatever the time frame is, where people are concentrated, focused on the material, focused on the purpose of it, focused on the outcome of it. I think it's here to stay.
Yeah.
And I will
that's the key.
always sing the praises of our instructors, from Dr. Bert Clark, Chuck Burkell, Don Mano, all the great adjunct instructors they brought in for special speakers, and how Dr. O'Neill has carried the academy forward the last few years. And now we have a female head of the National Fire Academy.
You're such a
So
politician, Helen.
we've seen a lot of,
Oh, yeah.
we've been part of a lot of history of it.
I think a good point there. You mentioned the instructors. Chuck and Bert had some fire service experience,
Mhm.
but it was limited compared to many of us. Yeah, look what they did with that program content
Right.
for us. I mean, it just, they're not just their knowledge, but their ability to put it together and make it count for something.
They gave their hearts and souls
God,
to that
yeah.
program.
And from a focal, not necessarily from a fire department point of view, from a practical point of view that we could use. It just, there's just no way to get around it. I think the EFO program is going to suffer when they're gone. That's my personal opinion.
Well, they're both gone,
I know they are,
but they're still there. I mean, they're still available.
yeah, the two
And,
pair of shoes going to be hard to fill.
yeah.
And, of course, we
So,
lost Don a long time ago, but he was
Yeah.
another one. Those 3 guys together, just EFO is what it is because
Yeah.
of them.
Because of them.
right.
And I know Dr. Clark is still involved in doing speaking
Yeah.
engagements and everything. So, yeah, we were blessed with amazing instructors.
Unbelievable commitment to
Yeah,
job.
And that can make or break a program.
sure.
As an
Oh my God,
instructor.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that could really make a break, because the student has to see that the instructor has an interest not only in the topic but in the student.
Sure.
I was just talking to somebody the other day about all the rabbis I've met and worked with over the years, and I said the ones I like the most are the ones who talk with their congregation, not to their
Mhm.
congregation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You can give a sermon that basically nobody understands because you're so smart. You could create the sermon and do it, but people are sitting there like that. But if you engage them when you give that sermon, or you're talking with them, and you're not trying to show how smart you are, you're just talking about something that's going to interest them, that they want to back and forth, and that's the way you're going to get people interested and to listen. They don't want to be lectured to, they want to be spoken with and be
With.
taught with.
Yeah.
That's the key. So to wrap it up, we've talked a lot about yesterday, today, and tomorrow. With all your backgrounds and your dedication to the fire service, where do you see the fire service in the next 5 to 10 years? Chief Phillips, we'll start with you, please.
Well, I see the fire service as being more of a where you had, like our county, 39 fire departments. You might see 15 departments before we're done, and they're going to combine with each other. And it's going to be important for whoever's leading those organizations to look beyond even the time that they are as chiefs, as what's going to be like in the future. And right now, that's a pretty gray area, but I do think that there's some chiefs out there now that are looking at how can we make some of these things from the past come back. And EFO is one of those programs. And the bottom line is EFO is going to always be there one way or the other. And there are people that are going to be interested in taking it. They're just going to need a little push to get there.
Okay. Chief Pyle?
Well, I have seen that the fire service is constantly changing, constantly evolving. And I think as more of the leaders come up through the EFO, through that system that says there's more to being a chief than just being a good firefighter, they're going to be using that to guide and direct the change and the evolution. It's not going to be evolution that's forced on them by rules and regs, even changes in technology. It's going to be driven by the people who have that background to do the driving. That's what I see.
Okay. And Helen?
Well, when I look back on my career, I was at the Austin Fire Department when the first female firefighter was hired. Her name was Lucy Huff. And that was a big deal in the city of Austin and the fire department. Then I saw women integrated into the fire service. I was either the first or the second. There's a debate on the date of who was the first female that graduated from EFO. And I wear that as a badge of honor I used to do a lot of public speaking to young women. Don't limit yourself. If you're not given an opportunity, make an opportunity. And for me, going to the National Fire Academy took me to places that I would have never gone had I not gone there. So what's going to happen in the future? I think it's going to be a broader service than we've ever known it to be. I think it will take on more responsibilities as time goes on with major disasters and things like that fire service will always be doing. But I don't ever want it to lose its soul, its camaraderie. like the three of us sitting here that have been friends for decades, and we will be forever.
Yeah, I know that feeling with my buddy. He, we met in '77. He was a young 18-year-old kid, didn't know anything, and we went through that department together. He left and became a cop, and he's had a very successful police career and chief pilot for a sheriff's department in Florida. And we are who we are. We're as close as brothers could be, simply because we met that first night, and we just shared a lot of learning time together. And I hope that I hope that we're going to be able to overcome some of the distractions that are that have having an impact on the fire service. And I know there was one officer who I heard, he made a good point. He said, you know what, there are certain times we're in the day room, and I want you to put your phones and tablets away. I want you to just be a family and just spend some time together. If you get a phone call, somebody calls you, well, answer it, but don't be spending all your time. We had you guys wanted a big screen TV. We got a big screen. You wanted the fancy chairs. We got the fancy chairs. But if you don't, in a home, that's called the family room or the den. And when you're there, there's usually interaction with the family. They're out together in the den, watching a movie, watching a show, whatever the case is. We need to get that more into the fire service to realize that we are indeed a family. If you are touched by the fire service, you are part of this family. And families don't always agree.
Oh my gosh, no.
Okay. Husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, brothers. We don't always agree. But even when we disagree, even when we argue and yell and scream, if you had the X-ray, you'd still see love as the foundation.
If the EFO program continues to use the quality of instructors and developers like we had, and the quality and content of the course material like we had, then they will recognize these issues as you're talking about as they come up. They will become part of the curriculum for the new EFO people to go in and debate and case study and solve. So I agree, things are changing, but I don't believe that there's anything out there that people, the leaders, with the proper background and training, won't be willing to tackle and resolve. I think they will. Always have.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know what? We always have. We've faced major challenges. For us down here in South Florida, it's almost a year now since the condo collapse. And we saw some of the best from around this country give up their time, their family, work to come down to Florida and spend days and nights digging through piles of rubble. And no complaints. They did it.
Yep.
They went to the thing. They did their job. Went to the food tent. Went to rest. Came back. It was amazing. We've seen this around the country. We saw it in Texas when the power outage 2 years ago. How first responders came together to do it. We saw it during the Houston floods. How the people came from New Orleans. Some of them were just civilians. They weren't even fire people who trailered their boats to Houston so they can help do rescues and help save property and stuff like that.
What I appreciate so much is, to them, it's just a normal day. That's what they do.
Exactly.
Look at me, I'm a hero. It's just, hey, that's what we do.
As my buddy and I have always said, it's who we are, it's what we do.
Exactly.
That's what it's all about. Well, I cannot thank the three of you enough for sharing time to talk about this part of the EFO program and get the message out there so that our listeners and viewers at least if we can pique their interest, by these couple of shows, then we succeed. We succeed, because if just one person says, you know what, I'm going to look it up, and they look it up and they say, I'm going to do it, then we've absolutely succeeded.
Yep, exactly.
We've absolutely succeeded. And that's our goal, is to put this in front of our firefighters so that they know what it is. It can't be something that's up in the ether.
Yeah.
From
exactly.
like you said, Chief, from the very beginning, from rookie school or the academy, you need to know about the EFO program. You have to know what it offers you, especially if you've come in with a bachelor's degree already.
Sure, ready to go.
You know what study is like, you know what prep is like. Well, this is going to challenge you. Do the same thing, but it's going to challenge you in ways that not even the fire department's going to challenge you. It will challenge you for life learning.
Mhm.
And that's the message we have to we'll get across. And from some of the kids that I see come into our webinars and taking notes and talk about it afterwards with us, or write an email to us, I think there are those people out there who, if they learn about it, know about it, they're going to say, I want to be better.
Sure, I want to be part of it.
I want to be part of it. Right, right. So to our guests, Helen Johnson, Chief Nelson Pyle, and Chief Harold Bud Phillips, our sincere thanks for being with us, sharing your time, sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and your experience, and teaching us about just how important the EFO program is and how important the academy is for everybody. You know, any firefighter can apply to attend the academy. And there are a number of courses there. Teachers change there. Matter of fact, I think Chief Rubin is teaching this week. I think he just came in this week to teach this week at the NFA. And we just got to let them know that it's out there. Emmitsburg is more than just our sacred place for the memorial.
Right.
It holds the heart of who we are, Emmitsburg. I mean, that's heart of who we are. We have the NFA there, and we have the NFFF there, and we have our memorials there. And that's who we are, because that's what our life is about. It's about service and giving of ourselves and helping our communities.
And there are a lot more programs there other than just EFO. So, and it doesn't require a bachelor's degree. So
Right.
once you get there, you will find a whole new perspective of the fire service.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Chief.
I never, in all my years of involvement with them, with the academy, I never heard a student ever say to me, I don't want to come back. I've never heard it one time, not once.
Nope.
And I know many, many students have gone there many, many times over and over again. So
That's
And
proof in the pudding.
the most important thing I have hanging on my wall is not my college degree, but my EFO certificate.
Yep.
It meant that much to me. It changed my life that much.
Well, apparently from all of you, including Dr. Clark, I mean, it did. All of you who went in the early days who went through this program have said basically the same thing. This program changed my life in my view.
it did.
You know, and that's what our listeners and viewers need to hear. This can and will change your life for the better. You just have
Yes.
to be ready to
Absolutely.
put the effort in.
It'll work for it, but it's there.
Right. You work for it, but it's there. Okay. You know, the farmer tills the soil and takes care of it from dawn to dusk, but it's hard work. But a couple of months into it,
Worth it.
you have the beautiful crop. So it takes a little effort. Listen, it takes an effort to be a firefighter. That's, you know, you just can't be a slouch. If you're going to be a firefighter, it takes the effort to do it. So here's an opportunity for you to grow, to learn, and to learn to become maybe a better person. And I guess if we can get, as I said, if we can get one or two people from these two shows to take an interest and take a look at it, then our job is done. We did it.
One more interest, and we accomplished something. I agree. Yep.
Exactly. Exactly. Folks, if you're watching the video, this will be the end. If you're listening to the audio, we'll be back right after these words. But again, my thanks to our guests for sharing this wonderful experience and knowledge that many of us, including myself, for a long time had no idea about it. And as I said twice now, I regret not having known about it earlier and not having partaken of it. We will be back with a new episode very soon before our summer break, and we hope that you will all stay safe and stay well, and we'll be back soon. To all of you, take care, and we'll see you
Thanks,
again.
Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite. Thanks for the